I need you to understand something before I start. I didn't go looking for the diary. I wasn't trying to uncover family secrets. But the moment I opened it, the moment my eyes fell on that first sentence, my grandmother described my birth 20 years before I was even conceived. She wrote the exact date, the exact time, the exact name my mother ended up giving me. And worse, she wrote how I would die. I've kept that page hidden under my mattress for months now. I don't even like touching it. The ink feels wrong, like it never fully dried. Sometimes I swear it leaves a stain on my fingers. I've never told anyone this, not my husband, not my mother, not my therapist. But I'm ready now, and I hope you're ready too. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. Now, let me pull you back to the day everything began. It was last November, just after we moved into my grandmother Eleanor's old house in northern Michigan. The place had been empty for almost a decade, ever since she passed. My mother never wanted it, and honestly neither did I. But life has a way of cornering you. My husband, Mark, had just lost his job, and the idea of living rent-free sounded like a blessing. My grandmother's house wasn't warm or inviting, but it was sturdy. 2 stories, white siding, big front porch, typical rural mid-century American home. I remember the first morning there. The cold felt heavier inside than outside, as if something had been waiting in the walls, still and patient. I chalked it up to bad insulation. I was wrong, of course, but back then, everything felt explainable. We spent the first couple of days cleaning out cobwebs, trying to air out that old linen smell. Mark worked on the water heater in the basement while I tackled the upstairs. My grandmother had been a quiet woman, almost severe, but she always kept her space meticulously organized. Still, there were boxes everywhere, some labeled, some not, some with handwriting that looked different. Not her usual neat cursive, but I didn't notice that yet. On the second evening, while unpacking in what used to be her sewing room, I noticed a narrow closet door behind a rolling rack full of dusty fabric. The door looked almost decorative, faded, painted the same pale yellow as the walls. Something about it felt off-center, though, like it hadn't been opened in many years. I hesitated before touching the knob, and this is the part that I keep replaying in my mind, because I swear, I felt a breath of cold air slide across my wrist before I even opened it. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't my imagination. It felt intentional, but I ignored the feeling. I shouldn't have. Inside that closet, wedged between 2 cardboard boxes, was a small chest. Wooden, hand-carved, with metal latches that looked far older than the house itself. When I pulled it out, a soft thud echoed behind me, like something shifting on the other side of the room. I turned quickly, expecting one of the fabric rolls to have fallen, but everything was still. Too still. I placed the chest on the floor and clicked the latches open. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not musty or dusty like old paper, something sharper. Something almost metallic, but sweet. Like the air before a storm. Inside was only one item, a leather-bound diary. The cover was cracked, edges frayed, and the binding looked hand-stitched. My grandmother's initials, E.M., were burned into the front. I remember thinking, why hide a diary? She was never sentimental. She hated clutter. So why keep this one thing locked in a chest, buried in a closet no one knew existed? I carried it out into the bedroom, sat on the floor, and opened it. The pages were yellowed but intact, written mostly in her elegant cursive. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Entries about church events, weather patterns, the price of milk, mundane old lady things. But then, 15 pages in, the handwriting changed. It shifted from neat loops to sharp, frantic strokes. Words pressed into the paper like whoever wrote them was afraid the ink would disappear. And then I saw it. January 14th, 1998. At 3:12 a.m., she will be born. She will be named Hannah. She will carry the mark. My heart stopped. That is my birthday. That is my name. But I wasn't born in 1998. I was born in 2018. I stayed at the date again, my throat tightening. I flipped ahead, page after page describing things about me, things no one should have known. But the last line, the line I still can't say out loud without shaking, was written in a jittery scrawl that dug into the paper so deeply it tore through the page. She will die before her 25th year, by the hand she cannot see. My vision blurred. For a moment I thought the room tilted. A faint sound, like humming or whispering, seemed to rise from the walls around me. I didn't know it then, but opening that diary wasn't the beginning. It was the invitation, and something had already accepted it. I didn't tell Mark about the diary that night. He was downstairs fixing a leak under the kitchen sink, and I remember hearing the occasional clang of tools, his frustrated muttering traveling through the vents. That familiar sound grounded me. It kept me from spiraling completely. I closed the diary, shoved it into the bottom drawer of an old dresser, and convinced myself I had misread the date. Maybe it said 2018 and the ink had faded strangely. Maybe my grandmother wrote some kind of cryptic poetry. I don't know. I just needed to believe something that made sense. Life had already been chaotic enough. We'd moved into the house because money was tight. Tighter than I liked to admit. Mark meant well, but losing his job had changed him. He wasn't cruel, just quieter, defensive, like he felt the need to justify every breath he took. I tried to be patient, reminding myself that stress made people different. But some nights I'd lie awake next to him, listening to the way he breathed, shallow, restless, and I'd wonder if we were both becoming strangers. That house didn't help. My grandmother had been stern, strict, and often cold. She wasn't the type to give warm hugs or bake cookies. She was a woman who believed in discipline and silence. Growing up, I spent most holidays trying not to upset her, tiptoeing around her rigid routines. My mother never spoke ill of her, but she rarely spoke of her at all. And now I was living in her home, sleeping in her bedroom, cleaning her dishes, touching the walls she once touched. A strange intimacy with someone I had never really known. Maybe that's why I pushed the diary out of my mind. I wanted a fresh start, not a ghost of a woman I was never close to. But of course, ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. That first week in the house, I tried to build a routine. Woke early, made coffee, walked the property. The woods behind the house were thick, dark even during the day, and the silence there felt too heavy. I avoided them. Mark said I was being dramatic, but even he didn't go back there unless he needed firewood. Inside the house, I scrubbed floors, washed curtains, and rearranged furniture, anything to make the place feel less like hers and more like ours. Some days it worked. Some days I'd catch myself hesitating before turning a corner, like I expected her to be standing there with that disapproving expression. One afternoon after Mark had gone into town to look for work, I decided to clean out the attic. Dusty cardboard boxes, old linens, a few moth-eaten coats, nothing special. But I found myself searching for something else. I didn't know what, exactly. Answers, maybe. Context, something to dilute the fear the diary had poured into me. Every box disappointed me. Every discovery felt too normal. I sat down on an old trunk and stared out the small attic window. Snow was starting to fall. Slow, heavy flakes drifting toward the bare trees. The house creaked around me, settling, breathing. That was when I felt it again. A cold breeze, just like the one in the closet. It brushed across the back of my neck, slow and deliberate, as if a finger had traced my skin. I turned so fast the trunk beneath me groaned. Nothing was there. The attic window was shut, sealed tight. No drafts, no vents. Still, the cold lingered, a warning wrapped in stillness. I whispered to myself, it's just an old house. That's all. Saying it out loud didn't help. When Mark came home that evening, tracking Snow into the kitchen, I almost told him everything. I opened my mouth twice, but each time I looked at his tired eyes, his slumped shoulders, and I swallowed the words. He didn't need another problem. He didn't need me unraveling. So I tucked it all away, just like the diary. That night, while we ate reheated pasta at the tiny kitchen table, I kept glancing toward the ceiling. The attic door sat directly above us. Every creak made my stomach clench. The house felt awake. Mark reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "We'll be okay," he said. I wanted to believe him. And for a moment, I almost did. Then something subtle, so small I would have missed it if I wasn't looking, shifted in the room. The overhead light flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. Mark didn't even notice. But I did. And I felt it again, the cold brush at my spine, a warning from something I couldn't name. Something in that house had stirred. And it wasn't done with me. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Nothing dramatic happened. No shadows crawling across the walls. No whispers calling my name. But the house felt different. Heavier. Like it was watching me. Mark didn't notice. Or he pretended not to. He was too focused on job applications. Too worried about bills. Too distant for me to admit what I felt every time I walked from one room to another. Still, the unease grew quietly, like a tide rising an inch at a time. It began with sounds. Soft ones. Ones you could mistake for ordinary creaks in an old home, if you wanted to. One morning, while Mark drove into town for another interview, I stood in the upstairs hallway, folding towels from the laundry basket. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. Then I heard it. A light tapping. 3 taps. Rhythmic. Coming from the sewing room. The room where I'd found the diary. At first, I thought something had fallen. Maybe a loose window shutter. But the tapping happened again. Slow, deliberate, almost patient. I stepped toward the doorway, towel still in hand. "Hello." My voice echoed slightly. I hated how small it sounded. Silence. I nudged the door open wider. The room was empty. Nothing moved. The closet door, the hidden one, was still shut. I forced myself to walk inside, checking the window, the radiator, the walls. Everything was still. I told myself it was the pipes, or the wind. But deep down, a cold certainty settled in my chest. The sound had come from inside the room. A micropause. I folded the towel with shaking hands and left. I didn't close the sewing room door behind me. It felt wrong to trap anything inside or outside. That night, I slept poorly. Restless dreams tangled with shallow breathing. When I did fall asleep, I kept jolting awake without knowing why. Once, I felt sure someone had whispered right beside my ear, a soft breath of a voice I couldn't make out. By the time the sun rose, I felt hollowed out. 2 days later, the tapping escalated. Mark had gone to help a neighbor move firewood. I stayed home, wrapped in a thick sweater, determined to keep busy so I wouldn't think about the diary or the sound. I swept the hallway, wiped down the baseboards, anything to fill the silence. Then at exactly 2:14 p.m., every hair on my arm stood up. Not from cold, something else. Something like alertness. A quiet dread pricked the back of my neck. And then, tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. Still rhythmic. Still coming from the sewing room. I froze mid-step. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping repeated, followed by a faint scrape, like fingernails dragging across wood. I remember whispering, "Please, don't." But the sound continued, steady and unbothered by my fear. I grabbed my phone, not to call anyone, but because holding it made me feel less alone, and forced myself forward. My hand trembled as I touched the doorknob. Before I could turn it, the sound stopped. Instantly, like it knew I was there. I opened the door carefully. Everything looked the same. Except, the closet door was now slightly open. Just a crack. A few centimeters at most. But enough. I felt a wave of cold air rush out, brushing across my ankles. A shiver crawled up my spine. "No," I said under my breath. I closed that. I was certain. I remembered the latch clicking shut days ago. But hey, it was open just wide enough for something, to be looking out. I didn't touch it. I didn't look inside. I simply backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on that narrow line of blackness. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the door creaked softly and closed on its own. A micropause. My chest tightened. I felt lightheaded. I sank to the floor, pressing a hand against my forehead as nausea swirled through me. If it had been the wind, the door would have moved randomly, not responded to my presence, not waited until I stepped away. When Mark returned home, I tried again to tell him. I almost blurted everything right there in the entryway. The sounds, the tapping, the closet door. But he walked in with flushed cheeks and a proud smile. I might have a job, he said. They're calling tomorrow. The relief in his voice cut through me. He needed hope. He needed stability. He didn't need whatever was happening to me. So I swallowed the truth and hugged him instead. That evening, as we sat watching an old movie on the couch, I kept glancing at the staircase. The upstairs hallway light was off, but I could see just enough of the darkness to imagine shapes shifting inside it. At one point, I swore I saw movement. A flicker of something near the top landing. Not a shadow from the TV. Something else. But when I blinked, it was gone. Later that night, after Mark fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My heart thudded heavily against my ribs. The tapping hadn't been random. The cold hadn't been coincidence. Something in that house had noticed me, and it wasn't losing interest. It was growing bold. I should have thrown the diary away, burned it, locked it in the trunk again, and pretended the house was just old, and I was just stressed. But the fear had already dug its way under my ribs. I couldn't ignore it anymore. 3 days after the closet door opened on its own, I finally went back to the dresser drawer where I'd hidden the diary. My fingers hovered above the handle for a long moment, hesitant to touch it. I could feel the cold radiating through the wood, like the book was breathing inside it. When I finally pulled the drawer open, the diary wasn't where I left it. It was sitting on top of the dresser, perfectly scented, waiting for me. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stop the cry that nearly escaped. Mark was in the next room, working on a budget spreadsheet, and I didn't want him to hear. If he saw the look on my face, he'd know something was wrong. He'd start asking questions, ones I wasn't ready to answer. I picked up the diary with shaking hands. The leather felt colder than the room. As I held it, the overhead light flickered once, then steadied. A micropause. I opened to the page with my birth prediction. The ink looked darker than before. Fresher, somehow. I ran my thumb across it and felt the slightest texture, as if someone had written it moments earlier. Then I noticed something new. A line I didn't remember reading. She will awaken what slept in my walls. My heart skipped a beat. My grandmother had always been cold, but never poetic or cryptic. This wasn't her voice. This was something else, something desperate. I flipped ahead. More pages were filled with frantic handwriting, completely unlike her usual style. Lines repeated over and over. The house watches. She calls to me at night. She is not the child I expected. And then, on a page that looked torn around the edges, almost violently, it will follow her. My bloodline is the tether. I snapped the diary shut. My breathing turned shallow. I felt dizzy, my vision blurring like I'd stood up too fast. Was it talking about me? Had it been waiting for me? I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the bed for balance. The room swayed slightly, as if the floor had tilted beneath me. That night, the sound started again. Only now, they weren't just tapping. I woke at 2 a.m. exactly, gasping like someone had yanked me from a deep sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red in the darkness. Beside me, Mark slept soundly. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging steps across the upstairs hallway. They moved from one end to the other, back and forth, steady and unhurried. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside our bedroom door. A faint whisper drifted through the crack, a woman's voice. Not angry, not pleading. Something wise, curious. I stared at the door, unable to move. My fingers dug into the sheets. I could feel the cold seeping into the room, inch by inch, like a frost spreading under the door. The whisper came again. Softer, closer. I wanted to wake Mark, but the fear gripped my throat. I was terrified that if I spoke, whatever stood outside would hear me and come inside. After several eternal seconds, the footsteps resumed and drifted away. The cold left with them. When morning arrived, I stumbled downstairs feeling hollow. My hands shook each time I tried to hold a mug of coffee. Mark noticed. "You look pale," he said. "Another bad night." I forced a smile. "Just anxious." He reached out, brushing my shoulder gently. "We'll get through this." But I felt myself flinch under his touch, not because of him, but because the night before had awakened something inside me. A terrible suspicion. The house wasn't just haunted. It was familiar with me. As the day went on, more evidence appeared. Small things, but undeniable. I'd leave a room for a few minutes and return to find objects shifted. Subtle, but intentional. A picture frame tilted. A chair pulled slightly back from the table. The sewing room's closet door cracked open again, even though I avoided touching it. The cold breeze showed up in random places. The stairwell, the kitchen doorway, the hallway leading to the attic. Always brushing just lightly enough to feel like fingers. And the whispers, they grew less distant. Not words yet, just the shape of them. Like something practicing how to speak. A micropause. By the fourth night, the footsteps were a pattern. Always at 2 a.m. Always pacing. Always stopping outside the bedroom door. The cold seeped beneath the crack like a living shadow. That night I finally broke. After the footsteps retreated, I slid out of bed, trembling so hard I could barely walk. I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and sat on the floor with my head in my hands. Silent sobs shook through me, not just from fear, but from a deeper ache. A guilt I didn't know how to name. Because the more the haunting escalated, the more a sickening realization grew inside me. My grandmother hadn't been warning herself in those pages. She'd been warning me, and she'd known something I didn't. Something about my birth, my existence. I grabbed the edge of the sink and forced myself to look in the mirror. I half expected a shadow behind me, but that would have been easier. What I saw instead was the truth etched in my eyes. I wasn't just being haunted. I was connected to whatever haunted me, and it was getting stronger. Fear can only stretch so far before something inside you snaps. For me, it happened the morning after my breakdown on the bathroom floor. I remember standing at the kitchen counter, pouring cereal into a bowl, my hands trembling so badly the flakes scattered across the counter. Mark was already gone for the day. I didn't hear him leave. My sleep had been too broken, too shallow, but I found a note from him by the coffee pot. Interview at 9. Wish me luck. Love you. The simplicity of it should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel small, helpless, like a passenger in my own life. And that's when something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let this house take me apart piece by piece. I wasn't going to be the woman who ran from shadows or whispered voices. I wasn't going to let something unseen stalk me like prey. If my grandmother had faced whatever this was alone, then maybe that was the mistake. Maybe I needed to do the opposite. Maybe I needed to face it directly. A micropause. The moment the thought settled, the fear didn't vanish. Fear never really vanishes, but it shifted. It sharpened into something focused, pointed. I felt myself breathing differently, calmer, steadier, like clarity had slipped through the cracks in my panic. I sat down at the kitchen table, diary in front of me, and made myself open it again. This time, not as a terrified granddaughter, but as someone searching for strategy. I read every frantic page, every scribbled warning, every repeated line about the house, the tether, what follows the bloodline. My grandmother had been unraveling, but there were patterns buried in her madness. Pages written hours apart, yet repeating the same phrases. Entries describing cold drafts in the same spots I'd felt them. Notes about footsteps at 2 a.m., written months before I was even born. She hadn't been imagining it. She had been documenting it. And she had been preparing for someone. For me. Near the back of the diary, hidden between two pages that clung together with age, I found a note written in a calmer hand, her normal handwriting. If she is reading this, I am already gone. Do not run. It follows. You must confront it where it roots itself. My pulse quickened. Roots itself. Where? As if answering, another line followed. The oldest room. The room beneath all others. The basement. Of course. I closed the diary slowly. My stomach twisted with dread. but the clarity didn't leave. The entity wasn't roaming the house aimlessly, it was anchored. And if it was anchored, there had to be a way to unbind it. Still, I wasn't going to rush into the basement alone without understanding more. I needed information, structure, a plan. The rest of the day, I moved differently, cautious but deliberate. I walked through the house studying temperature changes, listening for familiar sounds. I paced the hallway counting steps between cold spots. I checked door frames, windows, the attic entry, searching for subtle things I'd overlooked. Everything felt charged, like the house was holding its breath. But nothing attacked. Nothing whispered. Nothing tapped. It was watching, waiting, a micropause. That evening, as Mark talked over dinner about the possibility of steady work, I nodded in the right places, smiled when he did, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept imagining the basement door behind him, dark wood, old hinges, the faint smell of damp earth that seeped through whenever it opened. When he asked if I was feeling all right, I touched his hand and said yes. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. I felt purposeful. After he went to bed, I stayed up alone in the living room with only the table lamp on. I laid out everything I thought I knew. The entity moved freely but grew strongest near cold spots. It repeated patterns, footsteps at 2 a.m., whispers near doorways, tapping near the sewing room. The sewing room seemed connected to the diary, but the diary itself was not the origin, only a lure or a clue. The basement, according to my grandmother, was where it rooted itself. And me, my existence somehow tied into all of this. I realized something painfully simple. I couldn't protect Mark from something I didn't understand. And if this entity wanted me specifically, keeping him in the dark was the only way to keep him safe. I would confront it alone. At 1:30 a.m., half an hour before the footsteps usually began, I stood at the top of the basement stairs with a flashlight in one hand and the diary pressed against my chest. The air down there felt colder, heavier, like walking into a held breath. The wooden steps groaned under me as I descended. The basement smelled like earth and mildew, but beneath that was another scent, one I recognized from the diary's pages. Storm air, metallic, electric. When I reached the bottom, the flashlight flickered. I pointed it around slowly, scanning the stone walls, the old workbench, the dusty shelves. Everything looked ordinary, but the center of the floor, the concrete there looked different, darker, newer, a micropause. I crouched down, running my fingers across it. The surface felt cooler than the surrounding floor. Not refrigerator cold, grave cold. A dense, unnatural chill. Suddenly, the flashlight buzzed and dimmed. My breath clouded in front of me. Behind me, above on the main floor, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Not upstairs, not in the hallway. This time it was directly over my head. I straightened slowly, heart hammering, but I didn't run. This was the moment I had been preparing for. Whatever lived in that house knew I was in its space. It knew I had found its roots. It knew I wasn't afraid in the same way anymore. But fear wasn't the only thing that binds people. Determination binds too. Resolve does. And blood, whatever kind of bloodline this was, binds most of all. I took one deep breath and whispered, "I'm not running." The basement lights flickered violently. The entity had heard me, and it was coming. The basement lights flickered again. Once, twice, then they went out completely. My flashlight sputtered, dimmed, and finally died. I stood in absolute darkness. The air turned sharp and cold, as if the walls themselves were inhaling. My breath trembled out of me in thin clouds. I clutched the diary against my chest, fingers numb. Then I heard it, a soft scrape behind me, like something shifting its weight. Something that hadn't been there a moment before. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The scrape came again, closer. My pulse hammered in my ears. I forced my feet to move, backing toward the center of the room. The cold deepened as I stepped onto the darker patch of concrete, swallowing me like a shadow. A whisper broke the silence. Not from behind me, not from above, from right beside my ear. "Hannah." I gasped and stumbled forward. The darkness swirled, thick and alive. My hands brushed empty air, searching for a wall, anything to anchor me. But the basement didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt endless. Another whisper drifted through the cold. Lower, older, a woman's voice stretched thin with time. You came back. My throat tightened. Who are you? No answer. Only a long, trembling exhale that didn't belong to me. The footsteps began then. Slow, heavy, cycling me. I spun around blindly, arms outstretched, but there was nothing to see, only the sensation of movement. A pressure in the air. A shift of weight on the old stone floor. Step, 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 circling tighter. I tried to run, but the moment my foot moved, something brushed against my ankle. Light, cold, deliberate, like a hand reaching up from beneath the concrete. I froze. Terror locked every muscle in place. The voice came again, this time in front of me. You were promised. My chest constricted. Promised to who? Silence. Then the lightest touch, a fingertip pressed against my cheek. Ice cold. My skin prickled under it. I recoiled violently. Don't touch me. A hiss answered, sharp enough to cut the air. The darkness tightened around me like a fist. A micropause. I clutched the diary, flipping it open despite the dark. I couldn't see the pages, but I didn't need to. I knew the entries. I remembered every frantic line I'd read. My grandmother hadn't feared the house. She'd feared what lived inside it. And she tried to trap it, anchor it, by documenting everything, by binding it to words. If it had a tether, maybe I could break it. I lifted the diary in front of me like a shield. I'm not your blood, I whispered. I don't belong to you. The air vibrated. A deep, low sound, not a voice, but something older. Angrier. The footsteps stopped. The cold surged toward me all at once, slamming into me like a wave. I choked on the shock of it, stumbling backward. My foot struck the raised edge of the concrete patch, the newer section, the one that looked like it had been pawed to cover something. Or someone. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. Something was buried beneath the floor. And it wasn't my grandmother. A violent crack echoed through the basement as the concrete beneath me shifted. Hairline fractures spread outward under my feet, glowing faintly with a pale light that looked like moonlit frost. The temperature plummeted further. Suddenly, a shape materialized in front of me, just inches away. A woman's outline carved from darkness and cold. No face, no features, only the impression of a body leaning toward me. My lungs seized. I stepped back, but her shadow moved with me, mirroring every motion. You were born of her fear, the voice whispered. Now you will take her place. I shook my head violently. No, I'm not part of this. The figure tilted its head, studying me with the patience of something that didn't understand human boundaries or time. The diary pulsed with cold in my hands. The pages fluttered open on their own. The ink glowed faintly, new lines appearing across the paper even though no pen touched it. I watched, horrified, as a sentence formed in trembling strokes. Break the tether. My grandmother's handwriting, or something using her voice. I didn't think. I acted. I stepped onto the deepest crack in the floor, knelt, and slammed the diary against the concrete. The moment it struck, a sharp scream tore through the room, shrill, furious, inhuman. The cracks pulsed with white light. The shadow woman lunged at me. Her shape exploded into a swirl of frost and darkness, wrapping around my throat. I fell backward, clawing at the cold tightening around me. No air, no voice, no strength. The diary slipped from my hand, but as it hit the ground, it fell open again. More words appeared, fast, desperate. Name it. Reject it. Release it. I forced air into my lungs, whispering through the choke of ice. I reject you. The darkness tightened. I reject you, I said louder, fighting for breath. The shadow hissed, shaking violently. I reject you. I slammed my hand onto the cracked concrete. The floor split. A burst of freezing light shot upward, shattering the shadow around me. The darkness convulsed, twisting into a thin, screaming shape before dissolving like smoke into the cold air. Silence dropped into the room. Heavy, absolute. The cold began to lift. Slowly, carefully, as if retreating into the walls it had once claimed. The basement lights flickered back on. The cracks in the floor faded, leaving only faint lines. The diary lay open beside me, pages still and silent. The entity was gone. Or at least, it was no longer in the basement. I pulled myself to my feet, shaking, breath ragged. But as I climbed the stairs, one terrifying thought clung to me like a shadow. Just because I broke its tether didn't mean I destroyed it. I wish I could say everything felt normal afterward, that breaking the tether fixed the house, or fixed me. But the truth is quieter than that, softer, and far more complicated. When I climbed those basement stairs, my legs barely held me. My body felt bruised from the inside out, though nothing had touched me in any way I could explain. When I reached the main floor, the air felt lighter, warm even, but I still had the sense of being watched. Not by something hostile, just observed. I closed the basement door gently, almost reverently. The diary hung at my side, cold against my palm. Part of me wanted to throw it out into the snow. Another part knew I never would. It wasn't just a diary anymore. It was the only record of what had lived in that house. The only reason I'd survived. I sat on the living room couch for a long time, breathing slowly, letting my heart settle. The house didn't creak. Nothing tapped or whispered. The quiet was almost overwhelming, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me into sleep. When I woke, gray morning light filtered through the curtains. My throat felt raw, my chest tight, but there was a strange peace in the air. Mark came downstairs as I was making coffee. He paused when he saw me. "You look different," he said. I forced a small, tired smile. "Rough night." He kissed the top of my head. "You're always stronger than you think." If he only knew. A micropause. I almost told him everything right then. The footsteps, the whispers, the shadow in the basement, the way something had wrapped around my throat like winter itself. But as I opened my mouth, the house settled with a soft pop in the wooden beams, ordinary, harmless. And suddenly I knew the truth. He would never believe me. Not because he doubted me, Mark wasn't that kind of man, but because believing would fracture something inside him, something that held his world together. So I said nothing. Instead, I hugged him tightly. He mistook my trembling for relief about his possible new job. I let him think that. Sometimes lies are softer than truths. The next few days passed quietly. No tapping, no footsteps, no cold breezes, nothing. It should have comforted me. It almost did. But late one night, while brushing my teeth, I caught something in the bathroom mirror, a faint shimmer behind me, like heat rising off pavement. When I turned, it was gone. The room felt normal. Still, I stayed at that empty space for a long time. A micropause. That week, Mark officially got the job, and everything should have felt hopeful. He came home with this proud, relieved expression, talking about schedules and benefits and future plans. I smiled, nodding, matching his excitement as best I could. But I felt split. Part of me was living our life, making dinner and watching TV and planning groceries. The other part remained in that basement, kneeling on cracked concrete, holding a diary that glowed with impossible ink. I tried to shake it off. I told myself people recover from worse. Trauma fades. Nightmares quiet down. But something had changed fundamentally. The house no longer felt threatening, but it didn't feel empty either. It felt aware. Some evenings, I'd sit near the sewing room doorway, not inside it, just close enough to feel the air shifting, and I'd sense something faint, like a memory brushing past me. Not hostile, not dangerous, just present. Once, I swear I heard my grandmother's voice, soft, almost apologetic, when I opened the wardrobe to get a blanket. But maybe that was wishful thinking. One night, I went into the sewing room with the diary in my hand. I sat on the floor where I had first read my birth entry. The closet door was closed. The air was still. Nothing stirred. I opened the diary again, flipping through the frantic pages. feeling sadness instead of fear. My grandmother had fought this thing alone. No one should have to do that. When I reached the calm note she'd left, the one telling me not to run, I pressed my fingers to the words. I understand now, I whispered. The room didn't answer, but the warmth in my chest felt like a reply. A micro pause. We ended up staying in my grandmother's house. Mark loved the space, the yard, the quiet woods. I pretended the choice was practical, but deep down, it was something else. This was my family's house, my grandmother's house, and for better or worse, it was my house too. The entity, whatever it had been, I still don't know if it was truly gone, or just changed. Sometimes late at night, when the world feels thin and the wind rattles softly against the windows, I sense a presence, not threatening, but attentive, as if something is lingering in the dark corners, watching me with a patience that isn't human. And I wonder if breaking the tether freed it, or gave it shape. I don't fear it the way I used to, but I do respect it, because I've learned something quiet and hard and painful. Some hauntings don't end. They evolve. People like to believe hauntings end with a dramatic moment, a scream in the dark, a ghost banished, a door slamming shut behind you. But real hauntings are quieter. They settle into your life like dust, into the corners you don't clean as often, into the memories you pretend not to revisit. What I went through in my grandmother's house didn't give me answers. It didn't reveal some grand family secret or mystical truth about who I'm meant to be. Instead, it showed me something far more uncomfortable. We inherit more than blood. We inherit fears. We inherit unfinished stories. We inherit the shadows our loved ones tried to ignore. And sometimes, those shadows recognize us. I still think about the entity, what it wanted, what it believed I was. Some nights, when Mark is asleep beside me and the world feels unnaturally still, I can sense something moving quietly at the edge of thought. Not threatening, not lingering out of malice, just watching. Maybe it's the echo of what once lived here. Maybe it's the part of me that changed in that basement. Or maybe some connections never fully sever, even when we break the chains that held them. A micro pause. I keep the diary tucked away in a drawer I no longer open without reason. Not out of fear, but respect. Those pages were a map of my grandmother's unraveling, of her warnings, and of the boundary between the living and the dead that I crossed the night I broke the tether. When I do touch the cover, the leather always feels cold. Not icy, not dangerous, cold like something remembering itself. Life has moved on. Mark's job stabilized, the house feels more like ours, and the nights are mostly peaceful now. But I'm not the same woman who first opened that hidden closet door. Before, I thought horror was something that happened to you. Now I understand it differently. Horror can also be something you inherit, something that shapes you quietly, something that forces you to confront not just what scares you, but who you are when faced with it. You can live with fear. You can live with the unknown. But you cannot live pretending nothing changed after you've seen the truth. And the truth is this. Some houses remember you. Some bloodlines bind you. And some hauntings choose you long before you even know how to fear them. That's what I carry now. Not terror. Not grief. Just understanding. A softer haunting. A micropause. If my grandmother could see me now, I don't know whether she'd be proud or devastated that her warnings reached me too late. But I do know this. I'm not running. Not from this house. Not from what lives quietly within its walls. Not from the pieces of myself that woke up the night I whispered the words that broke the tether. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping the darkness. It's about learning how to live with it beside you, without letting it take your life or your voice. And that is the truth I wanted to share with you. Not for sympathy, not for shock, but because maybe someone out there feels a presence in their own home, or senses a coldness that doesn't belong to winter, or hears footsteps in the hour when the world is supposed to be quiet. And maybe my story will remind them that they are not losing their mind. They are just finally noticing what was always there. Some truths stay in the dark because they change us the moment we shine light on them. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels.